You know, we all make mistakes in every facet of our lives, and specifically, Valorant is no different. No matter what rank you are, mistakes will define wins and losses far more than just a flashy play here and there. Now it's all good though, because in this video, let's break down the top 10 mistakes that you need to fix right now. Now go ahead, grab some Pop-Tarts, lean back, gracefully tap that subscribe button, and let's get started. Now the first big mistake that you might not even know you're making is you're smoking incorrectly. No, we're not rolling anything. We're talking about smokes in Valorant, specifically Brimstone and Omen smokes. Now the first big thing that people keep doing wrong is they blind off their own LOS. Everyone knows that running onto a point entirely blind is fun, right? You want to be smoking the enemy's potential swing power angles, like Heaven and the choke points on the map that players could push through so that you and your team can push onto point and check the immediate angles. You don't want to be smoking off your own team so that when you're running onto point, you're running onto point blind. That makes no sense because enemies are just going to be looking at your smoke, and the second you pop out of your smoke, they can shoot you when the places that they could be anywhere on the point, and you do not know any of that information because you're running through a smoke. Now, another big thing that you might not know is that smokes need to be on the edge of a door frame. You see, a lot of people will take a door frame, for example, that leads onto point that you're pushing into or holding. The smoke should be on the opposite side of the door of the side that is leading onto the point. What I mean here is you don't want to have your smoke right in the middle of the door frame because then there's a lot of space that enemies can actually push through the smoke to take space on the point, and there's more angles from the smoke that you have to contest. The idea behind a smoke is enemies that are past the smoke get no information about you, and when you're smoking, you give them as little information as possible and as little space as possible to push on the point before you see them. This is incredibly important, and this is a really big mistake that a lot of people are making with their smokes. Now, the second big mistake is planting in default. You see, it looks like every single average Joe only knows one single place to plant. Well, guess what? There are tons of reasons why you shouldn't plant in default. There are an increasingly large amount of pre-learned spots, whether it's Raze's grenades, Brimstone's molly, Sova's shock arrows, and not to mention ultimates altogether. Planting in default may seem safe, but often it sets you up for an enemy play with their abilities. Now, the next thing that you might ask is, okay, how do I determine where to plant in what scenarios? Well, what really matters is sight control. Now, the most obvious thing to do is to plant the spike in the LOS of a person that controls a certain powerful angle. Consider this. Imagine one of your teammates have Heaven. They have control of the high ground. You want to be planting the spike in a position to where they can contest it from the high ground. Because imagine this example. You have your teammate up in Heaven. He controls it, and you don't plant with LOS to Heaven. Now, if you die on point and enemies push to defuse, your ally has to actually give up his powerful position in order to defuse the spike instead of being able to contest it from where he is. If he doesn't have to give up his position, then enemies actually want a route to flush him out of that position. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for them to defuse in the first place. You need to really understand this because this is one of the core aspects about planting in general, and it's something that is different depending on where your teammates control. Now, the second big thing you need to think about when planting a spike is that it's harder to defuse in general in the open, but when you're planting, your life is more at risk. We all know there's scenarios where you're rushing into a point and you don't have perfect information about where enemies are. Now, planting in default is typically very safe, and there's other places that are extremely safe, but keep in mind, the safer you plant, conversely, the more cover the enemy is going to have when they try to defuse. So if you have complete sight control, just plant it right out in the open, so that so many different power angles have perfect line of sight. Now, the third biggest mistake that keeps happening again and again and again: stop reloading after every kill. Say it with me now. How am I supposed to kill someone with 19 bullets? But all joking aside, you do not need to reload after every single kill, and more often than not, it's gonna get you killed yourself. One, it gives away location, which is pretty obvious. Enemies will often counter swing based on the sound and the fact that you're reloading. If you look at every single highlight, every single ace, every single POG play that you see online, almost all of them has players using their ammo as a resource. You don't need to reload unless you absolutely have to. And if you do have to reload, and I'm talking like 5 or less bullets in your AR, then you should use utility or some other factor in order to get you safe enough in order to reload. Remember that the actual amount of bullets it takes to win a duel is very low if your shots are on point. Use your bullets as a resource, and every time you get a kill, don't instantly just be reloading automatically. Take in your surroundings, notice where the enemies are, be ready for a counter swing, and then when you're all safe and you know you're safe, then you can reload. Now, the next big mistake that we have to talk about is not playing around enemy possibilities. Now, this is an interesting one because it's gotten to the point where people kind of know generally what enemies are going to do. They have this amount of money, they're going to buy an op. They have this amount of money, they're probably going to save this, and that. Well, here's the thing. If you always count on the enemies doing what is the correct play on paper, then you're going to get killed by things that you don't expect. Take this for example. You won the first round and your whole team is buying ghost pistols plus armor or light armor, and you just assume that the enemy is going to be running classics, so you fight them at the longer ranges. But the enemy team kind of mixed it up a little bit, and multiple members of the enemy team bought sheriffs because they had some kills. Maybe one bought a marshal, and they managed to win the second round, which should almost be unwinnable, and your economy is completely screwed because you bought just enough to still buy ARs if you won the round, but now you lost. So what I'm saying here is, just because there's a price point in mind where you can anticipate enemies' actions, sometimes enemies will not adhere to that, and don't always expect enemies to fit in those little boxes that you put them in, or the little boxes that they hypothetically should be playing in. Now, the next big mistake that happens a lot is forcing a flank. Some people, and you know who you are, live on the goddamn flank. All joking aside though, flanking can get a lot of value, and I'm not going to tell you it can't, but there are going to be times when you should just play your zone. Let's take something like Cat on Ascent, for example. You could be playing in Cat, and if you're on defense and you could peek out, you could definitely peek the enemy, right? But the problem is, there are a lot of different angles that people can kill you from. And I'm not saying that peeking out is always bad, but if you consistently try to force flanks, you will start getting shut down over and over again. You subject yourself up to a death, and a lot of times enemies are playing in default just looking for the opportunity to push in, and you become that catalyst because you're trying to force the flank. If the enemy isn't doing anything, don't feel like you have to do anything as well. And the big takeaway is, the more and more you flank, the easier it will be for enemies to just shut you down, because when you're flanking, you can't just take your time. You can't take your sweet time always. You can't look around every single corner from where you were to the backside of the enemy, especially if the enemy's all the way on C site and you're on A side on something like Haven, for example. This means that any enemy that is expecting you and literally waiting for you will camp you out, kill you, and then they'll be able to regroup with their team with the numbers advantage, not being afraid of the flank. Now, the next big mistake that I have for you is, this happens a lot, is it's taking too long to cash in your ultimate. Now, a lot of players want to find that perfect opportunity, that perfect scenario, handcrafted, you know, where they pop their jet ult and they get 4 kills, or maybe they Phoenix ult and they 1v3 or whatever. The thing is, you can get 2 ultimates per half fairly easily. I'm sure you've seen them in your game, sages that hold their res all round and almost never get an opportunity, or maybe don't. It is not that hard to just cash in your ultimates. Stop saving ultimates for next Christmas. I assure you, you'll have more ultimates by then. Now, as a general rule of thumb though, the best time to use ult and invest is when your team bought and you need to win, or else you will be extremely poor the preceding round. Essentially, imagine this. Because you get a certain amount of money for wins, you want to keep stacking on the round that you bought to ensure its victory, because its victory means you gain a lot more money for the preceding round. And let's say you all bought ARs and some of you bought ops, and you lose that round, but 3 of you didn't use your ultimates. Now, the preceding round, you're going to be poor, and you're not going to be able to set yourself up for the next round, and your odds of winning that round, even if you invest, is much worse, and the reward is much less. So the thing is, you want to kind of hard stack the rounds that you're buying, because you want to snowball those wins and that number advantage, keeping your guns for the preceding rounds while still sandbagging money. Now, the 7th big mistake is grabbing an orb and you assume that no one is nearby. This happens a lot when players say, hey, everyone's pushing B, and then there's an orb and they go grab the orb and then they die to a lurker. Well, sometimes, secretly, 4 people are creeping, waiting for that alert noise, only to doomblade you into oblivion. So here's the way that you counteract this. The first thing that you could do is tap it and wait. Kind of like when you would be defusing a spike, where you tap it and wait, and then enemies will swing you if they're nearby if they heard it. So if no one swings, then more than likely no one heard. So that is a very powerful strategy to use the orb sound to maybe get you a kill. But the best way, honestly, is just have an ally hold your angle. Say, hey, can you hold the angle? I'm gonna grab this orb. That is probably the most consistent if there's an ally nearby to help you out with that. Now, the next big mistake that's happening, and this happens a lot more at lower ranks than they do at higher ranks, but this is slow walking always. You got to move to the objective. Let's say that the spike is planted on the other side of the map. Well, what you should be doing is you should be speeding all the way to where the white sound circle in the top left corner hits the power angles and then start walking. Now, some of you might be like, whoa, what if they're hiding behind this corner? Or what if they're hiding behind this corner? Or what about this corner? Don't I have to check every single corner from where I'm at to where the enemy is at? Well, sure, if you had all the time in the world, you could do this, but you don't have all the time in the world. You have pressure on you. And if you think that checking every single corner from B to A means that you're more likely to win, no, that is not true, because then you're not gonna have the time to check the power angles, like the close swing angles, like heaven, like angles in the LOS of the spike, because you wasted time checking every angle from B to A. This means you're actually giving yourself a worse shot 99% of the time, because they're far less likely to be hiding in the angles near the other side of the point, and they're far more likely to be hiding in the angles that give them actual legitimate positional advantage, the power angles around the point. Now, that 1% of the time that enemy is camping in a corner near B site when their friend planted on A, well, if you want to play around that tiny percentile, then that's on you. Now, the next big mistake that I have for you is calling your flashes or even abilities. Now, specifically about abilities, you should try to be relaying what you're doing with your abilities, especially when it creates space. What do I mean by that? So let's say you're throwing paint shells cat. You could say nading cat, or you could say flashing main, or checking B with recon. What this does is it lets your allies know that an event is occurring before they make a move. So this better equips them to make a move. Like, let's say they want to push through main and they're afraid of cat angle. If you tell them that you're nading cat, they can make that move at the exact same time. Or they don't need to push out on B until your recon arrow goes out. So these are all things that just relay more information to your team, becoming a more effective communicator. Also, as an example of this, if you're planning to cypher ult, now if your teammates just rush out and die, if they would have known that you were going to cypher ult beforehand, then they would have waited until they got that information before they pushed out. Now, moving on to the last tip that I got for you, and this is about communication, and a lot of players relate communication to backseat gaming. You ever have that person that's like, hey, grab the op, don't run in with an AR, hey, use your nade here, hey, do this, hey, take this step. No one wants a backseat gamer in their game. Strategies are one thing, and that's something that you talk about as a macro. Legitimate strategies like, hey, rotating is probably smart here, or hey, we should take this site. But trying to tell people what gun to grab, what step to take, what ability to use is absolutely ridiculous. You do not know that person's skill set or their preference. Now, sure, there could be a way that is slightly better in any scenario, but remember that your teammates could just mess up trying to comprehend your directions when what they really should be focusing on is their mechanical performance and their own in-game actions. As an additional tip to this, if you die to something, try just making comms about it. Stop it with the cursing and yelling and complaining the second you die. You're not Tyler 1. You could be pissed off out of chat, but in chat, you're gonna distract the people that are still alive, and they're gonna have a hard time focusing on what they need to do next to win the round. Speaking of distract, I think that we distracted you from the morality of man for about 12 minutes, so it's only right that you smash that subscribe button. Now, before we go, my big question for you is, what big mistakes do you see people make in your games? Definitely let us know in the comments down below. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.